Year two for Matt Rhule at Nebraska. We know year two for him is when pretty much any team that he's coached, at least on the college level, you should use that for that. I know you've got notes. Year two for Matt Rhule is always you see the program flip. You see the program grow. You've got a great, potential great quarterback there, the best quarterback prospect that Nebraska's really ever had right now. So you look at Nebraska, and it just feels like with 7.5 wins, it's minus 104 to the over. I like them to go over 7.5 wins this year. I think this could be a big jump for this program this season.
Yeah, man. I pulled up the schedule real quick. Like, you open up the season with UTEP, and it's going to be a rebuild season for them as well, new coaching staff. Then it's Colorado. We don't know what they're going to be. Northern Iowa, Illinois, on the road against Purdue, Rutgers, Indiana. And then finally, you get Ohio State, but you could have 8 wins already and go over that win total. Then UCLA, USC, Wisconsin, Iowa. So not too tough a schedule. Obviously, like everybody's schedule in the Big Ten is tough. The league's much better. But you brought up you have a 5-star quarterback who initially committed to Ohio State, then Georgia, then Nebraska. And you have his uncle as the offensive line coach. 4 starting offensive linemen are back. The reason I like Nebraska so much, the defense is really good, dude. I mean, Tony White is a legit coordinator. They play that 3-3-5, and it gets better every year. Last year they gave up, I believe, 111 less yards than they did the year before and 10 points fewer. I think they get even better this year. They have legit pros. And then on, offense, they averaged 19 points because they didn't have a quarterback last year. But they still lost 4 games by exactly 3 points. 3 of those games they lost off an interception or they lost off a missed field goal at the buzzer. In 3 of those losses, they gave up only 13 points to Minnesota, Maryland, and Iowa. So with an offense with a pulse, I think they go from a 5-7 team to at least an 8-win team. And you have a 5-star quarterback. You have a strong run game. You have Emmett Johnson back. You have Jamal Banks coming over, the wide receiver from Wake Forest, who should have a monster year. And again, I really like this defense, man. So I think Nebraska wins 8-9 games. And also, this is just what Matt Rhule does. Year 1 is always about building culture, figuring out who he wants in his program. And then year 2, he wins every single stop. So pretty high on Nebraska. I agree with what Tom Casale said. I went back and watched the spring game one more time. I mean, dude, Dylan Raiola is the real deal.
Yeah.
He threw for 239 yards and 2 tutties. A big upgrade over Jeff Sims and an offense, again, that averaged 18 points per game. They were in every game.
He was supposed to be
Nebraska.
a Lincoln Riley disciple at quarterback, too.
Yeah, he kept switching and flopping. I mean, he was going to go to Georgia, so I like him a lot. They compare him to Mahomes. He wants to be Mahomes. And
you got to be careful with that, though. I know we do that a lot in sports.
There's no such thing as Mahomes.
Right, there's one. And so we do, right, everybody's the next Jordan. Now we're going to be looking for the next Mahomes, the next Tom Brady.
Yeah.
It's a very dangerous thing to put that comparison on, but we're going to compare no matter what. That's just the way that this whole thing works. But, yeah, no, Matt Rhule, it's funny. I know some coaches, at least in football, we've seen. In the NBA, we've talked about that with, like, Dan Hurley, the transition from college to the pros.
Yeah.
It's definitely harder in the NBA than I'd say it is the NFL. And maybe because Jim Harbaugh made it look easy, so maybe that's not totally fair. But I actually do believe Nick Saban could have been a great NFL head coach had he stayed. I mean, the Dolphins were a 500 team.
I think so too. I mean, if they ended
up, screw it, I want to go back to college.
Yeah, let's say that, if he gets Drew Brees and not Dante Culpepper at the end of his career.
Yeah,
I mean, maybe he wins a Super Bowl, man. I mean, it's crazy to ask this because he's 56-7, and I was looking at his potential buyout, $46 million. But with this hire of Chip Kelly, do you feel? It's almost like, do you think that getting to the college football playoff with the expanded playoff is enough? I'm just asking because obviously there's going to be pressure, and with Michigan winning the national championship last year and beating them the last couple of years, I hear a lot of people down on Ryan Day. I feel like I don't know if you would call it the hot seat, but do you think he is in trouble maybe of being on the hot seat or losing his job if they don't at least reach the playoff? Or do you think that's good enough?
Yeah, it's interesting because if you ask the fans would tell you he's 100% on the hot seat. They'd be like, This guy's, if anything goes wrong next year, get him on the first flight out of town. That's the fan perspective on it. But the program, the school, they seem pretty invested in him. The other big thing is just the change at athletic director, right? Gene Smith leaves. He just retired earlier this summer when the semester ended. And Ross Bjork is coming in. He was at Texas A&M. And so all these ADs, they want to make their mark by hiring the next great coach. So, yeah, I think there is a lot of pressure on Ryan Day from that standpoint where it's he's got to kind of prove to this next AD that he does belong because he's not necessarily committed to him because it's not his guy. So I think that's interesting. I think just in general, the shortcomings of Ohio State in recent years under Ryan Day, losing to Michigan 3 straight years, falling short in the college football playoff a couple years ago, that stuff still looms large to them. So to answer your initial question, yeah, just making the playoff isn't enough, and I think it's twofold, because it's not just the outside pressures, the pressures from like within the school that I think are weighing down on Ryan Day and the program. It's also like the team itself, like they talk about how this is a championship or bust season because of how stacked they are. Like their roster is so good. They got all these guys coming back on the defensive side of the ball: Denzel Burke, Jack Sawyer, Ty Hamilton, JT Tuimoloau. Like all these guys are coming back because they felt they hadn't accomplished enough during their Ohio State careers. And so if you only make the playoff and get bounced in like the first round, or if you maybe win a game and then lose the next round, I don't think anybody's going to be satisfied with that. I truly believe that the bar at this point is obviously beating Michigan is the big one during the regular season, and then winning the Big Ten championship game, which gets a little bit harder when you got a good team like Oregon in there as well. But yeah, I think they got to at least get to the national championship game for people to feel like it was at least somewhat satisfying.
What are the expectations for this offense and for Trevor Lawrence this year? Because obviously you listed off a bunch of questions that they really still have offensively, and I think everybody would agree that they regressed last year from the previous season, the first season under Doug Peterson. Listen, I'm a big fan still of Trevor Lawrence. I think he could be an absolutely great quarterback, but it's hard to deny the inconsistencies that we certainly saw offensively for this team last year.
Yeah, I mean, way too many turnovers. I mean, 60 turnovers for Trevor Lawrence in 3 years. The whole Urban Meyer thing, that needs to be completely...
Yeah. We don't count it. Don't worry, Rick. We pretend that season never happened, too, I promise.
Right. But, I mean, it's also at the point now that that's 2 years removed. And that excuse, especially after this contract, that doesn't work anymore in this league. You can maybe get away with that, at some point last year, and certainly back in 2022, but that's over. And that offense, averaged 14.9 points when he was a rookie. It went up to 23.8 in 2022, and Doug Peterson thought realistically he could get 5 more points a game out of that offense, putting him around 29 a game. I mean, being among league leaders, and that's what I've been yelling about around here forever. Outscore your opponents. I mean, become one of the most potent offenses in the NFL. They dipped by a point a year ago, almost 23 a game. So I think that's the expectation. And you need to do that by, limiting turning the ball over. Trevor Lawrence, as good as he's been early in his career, he makes his share of stupid plays. And I sat down with Mike McCoy last week, the quarterbacks coach, former head coach, and I said, I know you guys talk to him about it. I know you teach him all the time to not make mistakes. Is it because he's just trying to make a play, or that message is never going to really get through? And, McCoy kind of spun it a little bit after I asked it. But to me, that's the biggest question with Trevor Lawrence and his growth. He's been a guy who's been so good at every level that when counted on, he could always make that play. You can't do that in the NFL without some help. So those are the 2 biggest things that he has to overcome. If so, I think he's got a real opportunity. And obviously stay healthy. He had 5 different injuries a year ago. That was another big part of it.